I don't even know what's been going on in the world of sports. Have we seen anything?
In the world of sports?
Yeah. I mean, baseball season's over.
Let's see. Well, we've firmly established I never want to be employed by the Miami Dolphins.
Yep.
That's not a big surprise.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going on there?
But that was actually, it was a phenomenal finish to the Olympics.
Oh, I can't even talk about it.
Yeah.
They screwed up the 4x100 relay again. I mean, come on. I mean,
I know racing is your sport. I don't know much about it because
that just makes me crazy. It does.
Usually, unfortunately, it's like one of the last things of
it
the
is
Olympics.
Intended to be one of the signature events.
Right, I know.
And we're supposed to win it, Kyle.
I know. Well,
we got the 4 fastest dudes.
We didn't quite get there. And I know that you see this and you long for your racing career again, your running career again, but sorry, Doug. Yeah. I can't help you there.
Okay, done.
I'll just do the intro instead.
Do the intro instead.
On this episode, reports of slowing inflation, government negotiated drug prices, and campaign promises of price-controlled rent. Joining us to discuss all of this is AAF President Douglas Holtz-Eakin and data analyst Jacob Jensen. First up, of course, is Doug. Doug, thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Before we jump into everything, tell us what's been on your mind recently.
Oh, well, you triggered me by talking about campaign promises. It can't be emphasized too much what a reckless proposal it is to propose to unleash the FTC and the state AGs on price gouging by supermarkets everywhere in the United States. I mean, this has been interesting to watch from several perspectives. Number one, it's a terrible idea. Just a terrible idea. But sounds like you're whacking the bad guy, and food inflation has been a problem, and the administration has never yet, and now candidate Harris have never yet come to terms with leveling with the American people to say, look, we're going to get food inflation back to the 2% target, but the prices are never going back.
Right.
Like, you can't unwind that. That's life. This is not what it costs. We're sorry. We're going to try to have wages grow enough that you live well. That's the goal. That should be the goal. So they can't seem to instead, they have to come up with faux remedies for the food price inflation. This is a faux remedy. It's also incredibly dangerous. Excessive price increases. Define excessive.
Right.
Now, of course, no one can define that. So there's legislation from Elizabeth Warren. If you want to find a bad way to define something, look up the draft legislation, and then ignore the economic circumstances. Like big increases in demand, prices tend to go up. People want more of it. Nobody did anything except want more of it. I mean, it's not a criminal act, and criminalizing non-criminal acts is a bad idea.
Yeah.
So I'm really upset about all this. It's classic campaign stuff.
Right.
And now you see them running away from it as fast as they can while claiming they're not. No, she didn't say there's anything new here. She said it would be the first ever federal ban.
Yeah.
All right. Now she's saying she just wants to build on existing state authorities. She just wants to be, use the bully pulpit and talk tough to these companies. Run a real campaign, have real proposals. And everything will be much easier to explain.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like this is pretty good for an applause line, but other than that, I mean, economists across the board have said this is a bad idea and pointed to numerous examples throughout history of people doing this.
Yeah, there's that there was a company called the Soviet Union that fell apart over this. Yeah, there was that.
Yeah, so I mean, just clearly not a good idea. No. Just mostly campaign promises and.
It always bothers me when you get things like this because they indicate a certain lack of seriousness. Yeah, and I don't like that.
Well, speaking of, I'm sure we'll have a long conversation about more price controls later as the campaign continues and more of these wonderful election promises keep coming out, and you get more triggered.
Oh yes.
Let's jump into the economy.
Okay.
Last week, we got two reports, the CPI and the PPI. Both came out, showed, some slowing inflation, some good news. What do we learn from these reports about the state of the economy and what the Fed might do?
So let's talk about the latter first. The Fed's always trying to balance its dual mandate for full employment, which they interpret as continued high employment growth, and price stability, which they interpret as at the 2% inflation target. These are direct readings on the inflation target, and they are going toward the target. They have said they want to get to the point where they are confident that inflation will return to and remain at the target, and so this is additional evidence in that direction. The less they're worried about the inflation mandate, the more they can worry about the employment mandate. And if they're equally worried, you should be in neutral. So we've been worried about inflation. They're in restrictive 5.25% to 5.5% federal funds rate. So all of this leans toward reducing toward neutral the federal funds rate. And I think it is now a foregone conclusion they will cut in September. I think it is most likely a 25 basis point cut, not something dramatic. And it begins the not the rescue operation. It's the let's just get to neutral if it's balanced between employment and inflation risk. So that's really, I think, what we're getting out of this.
Yeah. To today's revisions that we saw with the jobs numbers, that doesn't change them to move them even quicker towards it, because I know like 25, we're talking about 25 and 50 here.
That's a really good question. So what happened was you go back and look at the data beginning in April of 2023 and go through to March 2024, and they got more information about employment from state unemployment systems. That's unemployment insurance systems. So what did they find out? They found out there are 818,000 fewer jobs than they thought over that period. It's about 70,000 jobs a month. We averaged 240,000 jobs a month over that period. So instead of 240, we're at 170. Does that really change anyone's view of whether the Fed was restrictive or not? I don't think so. Not dramatically. We'd have been happy with 170. The Fed would have been leaning against it. The most recent of these revisions is March. That's 5 months ago. So does that change my view of where they should be now?
Yeah.
No, not really. I don't think this informs this very much. And in fact, the perverse part about this is it lowers the March number.
Yeah.
And if you believe the most recent July number is absolutely true, then the growth has been more rapid, not less rapid since.
Right. That's a good point.
So, on the whole, I think this is a wash. You say, okay, we know, and off you go.
I mean, I think it's part of the problem that we always talk about is that these reports that we are looking at, it's looking at history and not necessarily about where we're going.
Yes. Revising the history of the Roman Empire shouldn't change the Fed's decision. As it turns out, neither should this.
So, as you were mentioned in your about price controls and being triggered, this, of course, just because inflation is slowing doesn't mean prices are going down. I mean,
No.
People's dollars are buying less than what they were, 2 years ago. We're seeing, the savings rate. I mean, people's savings have I think gone down dramatically in the last 2 years. Credit cards are going up. Walk us. These are still concerns out there.
So the fact that sort of it looks like the third quarter we're growing at a 2% rate overall, and that businesses and households are both continuing to spend doesn't mean you shouldn't be nervous. You should always be nervous. My main concern continues to be on the household sector, where it looks like spending in real terms is at something like 2 to 2.5%. And growth in real disposable income is at 1%. And that's been true all year. That can't last forever.
Yeah.
At some point, we got to get better disposable income growth, or spending is going to slow down. And so there are some downside risks on the household side that would translate immediately to labor market risks, things like that. So there are things to worry about, and the Fed's going to look at them, and analysts are going to follow them.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that's like the number one comment we get when we do a video, because we do those instant reaction videos to CPI or the weekly economic tracker is well, inflation's slowing, but I still can't buy things at the grocery store. So this it's a wage problem.
This was true 20 years ago. The first time someone walked me through polling data on inflation, they said when people say they want to get rid of inflation, they want the old price back.
Yeah.
You're an economist. You think in terms of growth rates. They want gas to be $1.50, and they want the price of groceries to go back to what it used to be, and it just won't.
Right. So over the summer, there was an increasing amount of analysts that basically were talking about we're headed for a recession.
That wasn't a crazy concern.
But then others now I think believe more that a soft landing is still on the table. Where do you stand on all this?
I've been wrong. Right. I thought we would see a slowdown and downturn late last year, early this year, and it didn't happen. Households carried the economy through. They then seemingly hit the wall this spring, but businesses picked up the slack, and now they're both grinding along at a pretty steady, unspectacular rate. So I don't have a recession in the foreseeable future. Not like I did before when you really were seeing the impact of the very restrictive Fed rates. And we have some things going in our favor, which is if the Fed eases somewhat, the housing market can recover some.
Yeah.
And housing is a big cyclical industry. You know, you build a house, you buy a refrigerator, you buy an HVAC, you pave the driveway, you hire a lot of people and buy a lot of things. That has down the supply chain big impact. So that's going to move in favor of the overall macroeconomy.
Interesting. Well, I know I think the Fed is meeting today, right? Or this week?
They are symposiing.
They're symposiing.
If that's a verb, I don't think it is. But
they're having a symposium.
They are in Jackson Hole for their annual symposium. Thursday, Friday is the actual symposium,
right?
Where they're going to talk about indicators of Fed policy, things like that. Jerome Powell will talk on Friday. That's the same speech he gave 2 years ago when he did the tightening cycle and said, here's how it's going to go. Yeah. Warned Americans of pain. They've dodged most of the pain. It's been quite amazing. So that's now that speech is being eagerly awaited to see if it's going to signal a 50 basis point cut or not.
Yeah, historians and economists will have to debate how Jay Powell got us through this, but I think he did a pretty remarkable job based off of where we were 2 years ago.
I think they completely screwed up in 2021. I really do.
They were behind the eight ball.
And since then, they have done very, very well. No one can complain. I don't see any way to do better.
All right, well, switching gears to another favorite topic of yours. The Biden administration recently announced the negotiated drug price for the first 10 drugs selected under the program.
These are known by the term of art, maximum fair price.
Yeah. Well...
So could there be a lesser fair price? But this is the maximum fair price. What does this mean? Never mind.
I'll let you keep going if you want. But no. AAF has obviously written a lot on this. Yes. There's a whole page on our site of all the stuff we've written on this negotiation under Part D. Everyone should go. We'll provide a link to it. Everyone should go look at that if they want to learn more. But walk us through the highlights.
So, again, they pick 10 drugs. They then, literally by law, this is in the statute, they drag them into a room and they make an offer to the firms. The firms can counter. Lots can go on in that room. There's a list of criteria by which CMS has to judge their prices. It doesn't say how to use those criteria, but research costs, competitor drugs, stuff like that. What are the prices but the important fact is there is no sunlight on this process. We don't know what happened. Mm-hmm. We will never know what happened. Right. We know they went in. A year later they come out. Here are the prices. And, the administration is claiming great success, 80% reductions in prices and all of that. I think there's an unfair presentation of those numbers and that a fair reading of it goes roughly like this. So you have the list price for the drug, and then PBMs and other actors in this system negotiate to try to get cheaper drugs. They get rebates, and they do that so as to give that manufacturer a preferred place on a formulary, so they get a lot of volume. So if I cut you, Kyle, a deal, you put me on the tier that has no copay. I sell a lot of my drug through your plan. We're happy. And the discount's worth it. So there's some private sector negotiation that's going on already. And that private sector negotiation was the core of the idea of the Part D program at its inception, and that's been going on every year. If you look in the data, the move from list price to net price, net of private sector negotiation, is about $300 on average. And then there's the where did we end up, and the movement from that net price down to where we ended up with the maximum fair price is about $100. Mm-hmm. So to my eye, the power of private negotiation remains extraordinarily powerful and 3 times as big as what they accomplished in the IRA, which is remarkable because in the IRA they had amazing artillery. They have this confiscatory tax, and they can ban other drugs from Medicare, and they take them in a dark windowless room and beat them with a stick, and we don't know. I mean, it's insane. It's not okay for a public program in the United States. Yeah. And it cuts both ways. I try to remind people, the drug companies could go in there with briefcases of cash and start bribing CMS. We have no idea. Yeah. It is no way to run a government program.
Right. There was no transparency in any of the negotiations.
By law, there's none. You may not talk. No, I mean, that's what it says.
That's insane. That's insane.
It's not okay.
Yeah, I mean, but like I think in your dish on this, you talked about like all those artillery they have. Maybe government doesn't need that much artillery.
Stop giving the boys toys. Take them away.
Right. Or the other point you said, well, maybe it's actually really expensive to make these drugs if they're only saving about $100 extra.
I think people ought to sort of think about that a little bit. CMS would be happy to have the drugs be lower. They don't care about the profitability of the drug companies. They've been told by statute to pay attention to research costs, so the cost structure does matter. So maybe when push came to shove, when the staff really ran the numbers, they're like, we can get $100, but we can't get $200.
Yeah.
Or we'll put these guys this drug out of business, and we need the drug. In the end, we want the drugs.
Yeah.
And that should not be lost on people. So, again, I don't know which of these explanations is right because we can't get in the room.
So, I mean, okay, but we do know that drug prices are high. Like, people are paying a lot out of pocket for money. What's a better way to go about, looking at this issue and maybe finding a solution for it?
So I think the better way to look at it is to not have a solution. We don't have a one-size-fits-all drug pricing problem. The bulk of prescriptions in the United States, the vast majority of prescriptions in the United States, are generics. Our generics are cheaper than anybody's in the world. The key to low prices is a lot of supply, and we've accomplished that in a great many ways. We have some places where the drugs are extraordinarily expensive, and they're right at the moment largely oncology drugs, sort of small population, very expensive drug. Now that they can sort of target the oncology drugs toward your genetic makeup, it's even smaller populations, very expensive. You're getting hundreds of thousands of dollars for a treatment. We need a better financing mechanism for that. If we want people to get those treatments, they can't afford them. Right. A single drug company can't afford them. There has to be some way to spread those costs out. And thinking about it as we have a special class of drugs which might be a different class in the future, but there's always going to be some new class of drugs that are very expensive. We've got to think about how to deal with those. And this whole idea that we're just going to, put a price control on the drug and have it be fine is really a dangerous way to think.
Interesting. Well, we've had a great conversation today, and so now I'm going to ruin it with a nice trivia question.
Okay.
Since January 1st of this year, the federal government has published rules in total of what net costs?
This year?
Yes. Since January 1st.
$340 billion.
$129 trillion in total net costs.
Oh, yeah, we got all those this year?
Yeah, that's what the fact of the day was.
Yeah. Well, we're at 1.
Actually, that's from Dan's week.
We're at 1.7 trillion overall.
Yeah.
And so, that's unbelievable.
So that's published rules. So,
okay.
And then with new costs of final rules, it's 1.25 trillion. Man. So really not that much difference.
Wow.
That equates to about 72.5 million hours of paperwork burden. So, I mean, but that just goes to highlight what we've been talking about on this podcast since the beginning of the Biden administration, that this is it's hard to put your head around the breadth of their regulations.
So I can't keep track of the timing this year, last year, last 2 months, because it's just been literally a tsunami.
Yeah.
Every time you turn around, here's a proposed rule, here's the final rule.
Yeah.
And we're in the trillions of dollars, and no one's ever been there before.
Yeah, it's wild, and it's interesting because as
we're
heading into an election season, Dan Bosch is working on a new piece. Hopefully, it'll be out soon about
Dan Goldbeck.
Dan Goldbeck is. Speaking of losing track of regulations, but anyways, working on a great piece about looking ahead to what the next administration might do.
It's a great
piece. And you have to believe that it's not published yet, but hopefully it will be done, and we'll get people the link when it's done. But you have to assume that the Harris administration will continue in one way based off of the history, or the President Trump administration would look at maybe a return to those regulatory budgets and things like that. But it would be interesting to see what that piece looks at.
Unlike most of these sort of outlook pieces, he knows what the Harris-Biden administration did.
Right.
So he can extrapolate. He knows what Trump did.
Mm-hmm.
So both are sort of weird semi-incumbents.
Yeah.
And so you sort of get a better feel for what they might actually do, and they're dramatically different. So it's even more fun.
It'll be interesting.
It'll be fun to see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Well, Doug, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
We'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks.
All right, let's turn to rent control, and joining us is making his podcast debut is Jacob Jensen. Welcome.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming on. You excited?
Yeah, great to be here.
All right, so we'll jump right into things. Let's talk some rent control. While Vice President and presidential candidate Kamala Harris has not articulated any specific policy on this issue, she has stated that her administration would take on corporate landlords and cap unfair rent increases, quote unquote. Jacob, walk us through what's going on there.
Yeah, so just a few weeks ago, the Biden administration had laid out a proposal that would cap rents at 5% annually, the growth. And this would effectively impact about half of all rental housing units throughout the United States. It's meant to target corporate landlords in particular, which are landlords that have 50 or more rental units. And as of right now, the Harris has not given any specifics on what her program might look like, but she's certainly made it clear that she wants some sort of rent control program going forward.
Yeah, and that would just be bad logic, right?
Yeah, it doesn't really take into account the economic fundamentals like supply and demand when it comes to housing.
Yeah, because I know your paper was talking about the Biden administration's 5% proposal, but she's kind of attached herself to that without giving specifics to give her some obvious wiggle room there. So according to your research that you put out on that plan, what would be the outcome of a federal rent cap like that?
Yeah, so there's two possible scenarios that could happen. And the first scenario is the case that nothing happens. There's no impact on rent. It doesn't go down. And the federal government actually ends up spending about $1 billion annually for nothing to occur in terms of rent. And that's on just administrative and monitoring costs. And the reason this is the case is because since about 2005, the median increase in rent has been about 3 to 4% annually. So it doesn't get up to that 5% cap. So there'd be no impact.
Right. And the second outcome?
Yeah, in the second scenario, it would actually increase rent on renters by about $3,500 to $6,000 over a 5-year period. And this is because landlords will see this 5% cap as an opportunity to raise costs.
Yeah, so I mean, because they would basically just say, "Oh, I can only raise it 5% this year. I don't need to, but I'm going to because that's what if I need to raise it 8% in another year to keep up with."
They might anticipate that future costs will be above that 5%, so they're trying to get ahead of the curve.
Exactly. So my rent is unnecessarily going up 5%, and let me tell you something: my wages don't stay up 5% every year, so that becomes a real problem. And as you've noted, I think in your research, and that this isn't the first time these rent controls have been proposed or done. There's plenty of examples out there. What can you tell us what some of the results of those rent controls have been?
Yeah, unfortunately, this isn't a new idea. It's been tried and tested across the United States in multiple cities over time. The most prominent example is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. They did a rent control program back in the 1970s and eventually repealed it. And it was uncovered that after repeal of the rent control program, property values skyrocketed by about 45%, which showed that the rent control program had devalued properties. And it was calculated that over the course of the program, local property owners had to bear about $2 billion in costs.
Wow.
Yeah.
So basically, when the property value went up, they couldn't do repairs because they couldn't keep up with costs, and they couldn't, tenants would, inevitably have wear and tear. So, those units devalued over time.
That's one of the unfortunate consequences of rent control is lower quality housing.
Yeah, and I know there was another example you mentioned, Argentina, which I believe just got rid of theirs as well, or something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of new studies coming out about Argentina. I believe they got rid of their rent control program in December of 2023. And since then in Buenos Aires, housing supply has gone up about 200%.
Yeah.
So it really shows what getting rid of rent control can do.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Jacob, that's thanks for coming on and breaking that down. Unfortunately, this is a proposal that's out there in the election, and we'll have to continue reading more about it. So it's good to have somebody looking at the research now and getting ahead of the curve on this.
Great. Thanks for having me.